That's that girl over there. She turned me down. She said she didn't dance with losers.
Loser! You're a loser! Bunch of losers.
You made me feel like a loser!
The guy's a loser. Losers! La loser. I'm a loser. Losers. Loser. 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 New Year!
Americans hate to lose. Our society is competitive. We celebrate winners and we ridicule losers. And that creates a real problem for Christians because Jesus Christ has called us to be the best losers of all. Let me explain. America's focus on winning, when combined with the popularity of all things Jesus-y, produces some very strange stuff. For example, Philippians 4:13 has become ubiquitous in America's sports culture. Steph Curry has it on his shoes. Tim Tebow wrote it on his eye black. We put it on awards and trophies, hoodies and jerseys, even golf balls and ping pong paddles. Basically, we attach this verse to any competitive activity we want to win because it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We assume this verse is about winning, and because Americans view everything as a battle with a winner and a loser, you can find Philippians 4:13 in some very weird places. On wine glasses, on weapons, on underwear, even on toilet seat covers. That battle is kind of real. Philippians 4:13 is so popular because we want Jesus to give us the strength to beat the record, to beat our rivals, and to beat BB-8 for some reason. This verse is the perfect synthesis of America's worship of success and our worship of Jesus. We don't want to be a loser, and Philippians 4:13 tells us that Jesus doesn't want us to be a loser either. Or does it? When we read the verse in its context, we discover that Paul wasn't writing about the strength to win, but the strength to lose. Look at what he wrote. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Christ gave Paul the strength of contentment, even when the outcome wasn't what he wanted. Even when he was miserable, rejected, beaten down, or thrown in prison, when the entire world looked at him and called him a loser, Paul was at peace through the presence of God in him. So how does Philippians 4:13 apply to sports? I appreciate what Pastor Monty Waldron said. Had Paul applied this to athletes, he might have said, after training my guts out and giving my all on game day, I can live with the results. Regardless of what's at stake, I can play by the rules. Win or lose, I can genuinely treat coaches, officials, and fellow competitors with love and respect. I can express gratitude regardless of the outcome, all because of the strength I possess as a follower of Christ. It's worth remembering that none of this was theoretical for Paul, and the Christians he was writing to in Philippi knew it. When Paul first came there to spread the message of Jesus, he was beaten and thrown into a dungeon. And how did he respond? He sang praises to God. And when an earthquake broke open the prison door, giving Paul a chance to escape, he was so content with his circumstances that he chose to stay in the prison. Because Paul's contentment was not about his situation. It wasn't about winning or losing. And by the way, Paul wrote his letter to the Philippians while he was in another prison in Rome. And once again, he didn't view his circumstances as unfair. He wasn't crushed by his loss of freedom, the ridicule of others, or the humiliation of being in chains. Instead, he rejoiced. In Philippians chapter 1, he wrote that he rejoiced that the gospel was spreading and that he could honor Christ even behind bars, whether by his life or by his death. Paul really was content in any situation. He had learned the secret to being a confident, cheerful loser. And it's a lesson that we need to learn today, because we're not very good losers. When things don't go the way we planned, when our side doesn't win, our instinct isn't like Paul's. We don't sing songs, we don't rejoice, we don't experience the supernatural peace of Christ. Instead, we panic, we catastrophize. Sometimes we even justify violence in the name of Christ, all because we cannot accept losing, and we have a twisted vision of a Jesus who cannot lose either. And that's really what this is about, our vision of Jesus. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul wrote about a Jesus who embraced losing. He welcomed it. He willingly humbled himself. He accepted ridicule and even allowed his enemies to murder him in the most humiliating way possible, on a cross. From the world's perspective, there was no bigger loser than Jesus. But things looked very different from God's perspective. Because Jesus was willing to lose everything, therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. And here's the key. Paul says that we should have the same attitude as Jesus. We should be okay with losing, because we know losing is not the end of the story. And what looks like losing to the world is actually how God wins. That is why Paul was a confident, cheerful loser. He was following the example of Jesus. Unfortunately, the vision of a Jesus who wins by losing isn't a vision that's very popular today. We want a Jesus who wins by winning, a Jesus who is strong and respected and no one's going to mess with. In other words, we don't want the Jesus that Paul knew. We don't want the biblical Jesus. We want the American Jesus. Rather than being transformed into his image, we've remade Jesus into ours. So, after an election or some cultural battle, if you see Christians panicking, if they're despondent, outraged, or acting like it's the end of the world, that's a pretty good sign they're following a counterfeit Jesus, and they don't possess the strength that Paul described in Philippians 4:13, the strength of Christ to be a confident, cheerful loser. If we rework Monty Waldron's take on Philippians 4:13 and apply it to politics, it means that after working my guts out and giving my all on election day, I can live with the results, regardless of what's at stake. I can play by the rules and follow the law. Win or lose, I can genuinely treat political opponents and fellow citizens with love and respect. I can express gratitude regardless of the outcome, all because of the strength I possess as a follower of Christ. Philippians teaches us that everything looks very different from God's point of view. Through weakness, we find strength. Through death, we receive new life. Through defeat, we discover the way to victory. And it's the one who looks like a loser that he exalts, and the one who thinks all that matters is winning, he's the real
Le who, the her.
To learn more, check out the resources in the notes and follow us at holypost.com.